The night air buzzed with excitement outside the Ed Sullivan Theater in New York City. Fans lined the sidewalks, hoping to catch a glimpse of one of Hollywood's most respected actors. Inside, the production team of The Late Show rushed around making final preparations. Tonight was special. Denzel Washington would be sitting across from Stephen Colbert. 5 minutes, people called out the floor director, clapping his hands. The audience members settled into their seats, phones ready to capture anything memorable. Behind the scenes, Denzel sat in the green room, reviewing notes about his new project. Unlike many celebrities who brought entourages, he preferred keeping things simple, just him and his longtime assistant, who sat quietly in the corner checking emails. "How are you feeling about tonight?" asked Tom, one of the show's producers who poked his head through the door. "Just another conversation," Denzel replied with that signature half-smile that had charmed movie audiences for decades. But those who knew him well could sense something different in his demeanor. He seemed more thoughtful than usual, almost as if he had something specific on his mind, beyond promoting his latest work. In the control room, the executive producer watched the monitors while speaking into her headset. "Colbert's opening monologue is killing it tonight. The audience is warm and ready." What nobody realized was that earlier that day, Denzel had watched a news segment that deeply troubled him, a piece about how entertainment shows often simplified complex social issues. The topic had struck a nerve, connecting to something he'd been thinking about for months. As the audience's applause signaled the end of Colbert's monologue, makeup artists gave Denzel final touches. The floor manager knocked on his door. "We're ready for you, Mr. Washington." The famous actor straightened his tie, took a deep breath, and walked through the backstage labyrinth. He stood in the wings, watching as Colbert introduced him with genuine enthusiasm. The band played his entrance music, and the audience rose to their feet in thunderous applause. "Ladies and gentlemen, one of the greatest actors of our generation, Denzel Washington." Denzel walked out with his characteristic confidence, waving to the crowd before giving Colbert a warm handshake and sitting down. The first few minutes flowed naturally, light banter about New York traffic, jokes about getting older, and heartwarming stories about Denzel's family. The audience laughed at all the right moments, camera operators captured perfect reaction shots, and the control room team nodded in satisfaction. This was shaping up to be exactly the kind of segment that would trend online tomorrow. 20 minutes into the interview, Colbert smoothly transitioned topics. "So I have to ask about something that's been in the news lately." He referenced a politically charged issue that had divided public opinion. The energy in the room shifted subtly. Production assistants exchanged glances. This wasn't in the pre-interview notes they had discussed with Denzel's team. Denzel's expression changed, not dramatically, but noticeably to those paying close attention. He uncrossed his legs and leaned forward slightly, his eyes focused intently on Colbert. "That's interesting you bring that up," he said, his voice taking on that measured tone he often used in his most powerful film scenes. "Because I've been thinking about how we discuss these matters in public spaces." In the control room, the director sensed something unexpected developing. "Stay on the two-shot," she instructed, keeping both men in frame. The audience, who had been laughing moments before, grew quiet, sensing the conversation had taken a serious turn. Colbert, always quick on his feet, tried to maintain his usual rhythm but found himself responding to Denzel's suddenly changed energy. No one realized they were witnessing the beginning of what would become one of late-night television's most memorable moments, an unscripted exchange that would challenge the boundaries between entertainment and substantive dialogue, between promotional appearances and authentic human connection. The stage was set for something truly unexpected to unfold. The tension in the studio grew as Denzel shifted in his seat. The bright studio lights felt warmer suddenly, and the audience sensed something changing in the atmosphere. Colbert, usually smooth and in control, glanced briefly at his notes. "So about your new film," Colbert continued, trying to steer back to safer territory. "I heard the filming conditions were pretty tough." Denzel nodded but didn't take the bait. "You know, Stephen, before we talk more about the movie, I'd like to address what you just brought up." His voice was calm but firm, the kind of tone that made everyone in the room pay attention. The camera operators exchanged quick glances. This wasn't following the usual celebrity interview script. In the control room, the producer spoke urgently into her headset. "Stay with it. Don't cut away." "The issue you mentioned," Denzel continued, isn't something that can be covered in a quick sound bite between commercial breaks. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. It affects real people in real communities. Colbert's eyebrows rose slightly. He was known for handling unexpected moments with humor, but something in Denzel's expression told him this wasn't the time for jokes. "I'm glad you feel comfortable bringing this up," Colbert said, his voice taking on a more serious tone to match his guests. "Comfortable isn't the word I'd use," Denzel replied with a small smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Necessary is more like it." In the audience, people stopped checking their phones. A woman in the third row whispered to her friend, "Is this part of the show?" No one knew the answer. "When public figures like us discuss these topics," Denzel continued, "we have a responsibility to do more than just scratch the surface. People are listening. They take what we say seriously." Colbert nodded slowly. "You're absolutely right. But isn't that why it's important to at least start these conversations, even in forums like this?" "Starting conversations isn't the problem," Denzel said, his voice gaining intensity though he never raised it. "It's how we frame them. It's whether we're willing to go beyond easy talking points." A production assistant frantically flipped through note cards, looking for guidance on where this unexpected exchange might be heading. There was none. "I didn't come here planning to talk about this," Denzel admitted, "but since you brought it up, I think your viewers deserve more than the usual celebrity non-answer." The studio felt unusually quiet. Even the camera operators seemed to be holding their breath. "So what would that look like?" Colbert asked, genuine curiosity replacing his initial surprise. "What does a real conversation about this look like to you?" Denzel looked directly at the host, then at the audience, then back at Colbert. "First, it means acknowledging that there are no simple solutions. It means being willing to listen more than we speak." He stood up unexpectedly, removing his microphone clip. "And sometimes," he said, looking directly at Colbert, "it means knowing when a conversation needs more time and a different setting than what we have here." Gasps rippled through the audience. Colbert's eyes widened as he realized his guest was actually preparing to leave mid-interview, something that simply didn't happen on major network shows. "Whoa, hold on," Colbert said, standing up as well. "Are you suggesting we end the interview?" "I'm suggesting we either change how we're approaching this topic or yes, we should end it rather than do it a disservice." The floor director made a slashy motion across his throat, the universal signal to cut to commercial. But Colbert held up his hand, stopping him. "In 15 years of doing this, I've never had a moment quite like this one," Colbert admitted to both Denzel and the audience. "But I respect what you're saying." For a moment, the two men just looked at each other, the famous actor and the famous host, while everyone around them waited to see what would happen next. The commercial break signal came again, more urgent this time. "We need to take a break," Colbert finally said. "But I hope you'll stay, and we can figure out a better way to have this conversation when we return." Denzel didn't sit back down, but he didn't walk off either. He simply nodded. "We'll see." As the show cut to commercial, no one in the studio moved, all eyes fixed on the unprecedented standoff happening center stage. The moment the on-air light dimmed, the studio erupted in controlled chaos. Stage managers rushed forward, producers stepped out from behind curtains, and Colbert's showrunner appeared as if from nowhere. The audience members leaned forward in their seats, whispering excitedly to each other, unsure if what they were witnessing was real or some elaborate planned bit. "We need to resolve this now," the showrunner said quietly but firmly, addressing both men. "We've got 3 minutes until we're back live." Denzel stood his ground, microphone still in hand though detached from his suit jacket. "I didn't come here looking for drama," he said, his tone measured and calm despite the tension. "But I won't participate in turning important issues into entertainment soundbites." Colbert ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture that revealed his genuine concern. Unlike most celebrity moments, this wasn't something his team had anticipated or prepared for. This was real. "What would make you comfortable enough to continue?" Colbert asked, ignoring the frantic signals from his producers. "Honesty," Denzel replied simply. "A real conversation where we acknowledge the complexity. Not just quick questions with quicker answers before we cut to commercial." The showrunner checked his watch nervously. 1 minute 45 seconds, Stephen. Off to the side, network executives had appeared and were huddled together, speaking in urgent whispers. One was already on the phone, likely with higher-ups who were watching the feed. "Forget the planned segments," Colbert said suddenly, making a decision. "When we come back, we just talk. No pre-written questions, no promotional angles, just an honest conversation about why this matters to you." The director shook her head. "We can't just throw out the rundown mid-show." "Yes, we can," Colbert countered, surprising everyone with his firmness. "That's the point of doing this live." Denzel studied Colbert's face, looking for any sign of insincerity. Finding none, he nodded slowly. "That works for me." 30 seconds, called out the floor manager. The audience had fallen completely silent, sensing they were witnessing something unprecedented in late-night television. The bandleader looked questioningly at Colbert, who shook his head slightly. "No music for the return." "You understand this might not be funny," Denzel warned. "This might not give you the clips that go viral tomorrow." "I'm counting on it," Colbert replied with unexpected seriousness. "Some things matter more than viral clips." As the countdown reached 5 seconds, both men returned to their seats. The microphone technician rushed forward to reattach Denzel's mic, barely finishing before the red light on camera one lit up again. The usual upbeat energy that typically followed a commercial break was noticeably absent. The audience held their collective breath, unsure what would happen next. "Welcome back," Colbert said, his voice lacking its usual performative quality. "If you're just joining us, we're having a conversation with Denzel Washington that's taken an unexpected turn. And rather than steer it back to our planned talking points, we've decided to follow where it leads." Denzel nodded appreciatively. "Thank you for that. It's rare in media today." "Before the break, you mentioned responsibility," Colbert continued. "Can you talk more about what you meant by that?" "I believe those of us with platforms have a duty to use them thoughtfully," Denzel began, settling into his chair. "When we discuss serious issues that affect people's lives, we shouldn't simplify them just because we're on television." The camera operators, sensing the importance of the moment, stayed on a steady two-shot, capturing both men's expressions without the usual cuts and zooms that characterized late-night TV. "The easy thing would be to give you a quick opinion that makes half the audience cheer and the other half angry," Denzel continued. "The harder thing, the right thing, is to acknowledge that most important issues don't fit into neat boxes." Colbert leaned forward, genuinely engaged. "So how do we do better? How do I do better as someone hosting these conversations?" For the first time since the tension began, Denzel smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. "By doing exactly what you're doing right now, by being willing to set aside the script when the moment calls for something more authentic." In the control room, executives who had been panicking moments before watched in growing amazement as ratings numbers began to climb. Viewers at home, sensing something unusually real was happening, were tuning in. What had started as a potential disaster was transforming into something neither man had planned, but both now recognized as valuable, a moment of genuine truth on a medium often criticized for its superficiality. As the commercial break ended, the studio remained eerily quiet. The usual bustle and whispered directions from crew members had been replaced by a focused intensity. This wasn't just an interview anymore. It was a moment that seemed to hold weight beyond entertainment. The studio audience, usually eager to laugh at the slightest joke, sat perfectly still. Many leaned forward in their seats, not wanting to miss a single word of what was unfolding before them. A few had their phones out, recording what they instinctively knew was becoming a significant cultural moment. Colbert, now standing, addressed the audience directly. "Folks, we're doing something different tonight," he explained, his voice lacking its usual performative edge. "We're setting aside our planned segments to have a real conversation. No pre-written jokes, no viral moments we're trying to manufacture. Just two people trying to talk honestly about things that matter." He turned to Denzel, who remained standing as well. The two men faced each other in the center of the stage, the desk and chairs, the usual barriers between host and guest, temporarily abandoned. "I've been doing this show for years," Colbert continued, "and sometimes I wonder if the format itself makes it impossible to discuss anything with real depth." Denzel nodded, appreciating the candor. "That's exactly my point. The medium shapes the message. When we have 5 minutes between commercials, how can we expect to cover topics that scholars spend lifetimes trying to understand? A production assistant stepped forward hesitantly, offering both men handheld microphones so they could move freely around the stage. Both accepted, and the conversation took on the feeling of a dialogue rather than an interview. "So what do we do about it?" Colbert asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. "Just avoid serious topics altogether on shows like this." "No," Denzel replied firmly. "That would be worse. These shows reach millions of people. Ignoring important issues would be irresponsible." He paced a few steps, gathering his thoughts. "But we need to change our approach. Acknowledge the limitations. Be honest about what we don't know." In the control room, network executives who had initially panicked were now watching in fascination. One pointed to the social media feeds displayed on a side monitor where comments were pouring in. "This is extraordinary," he whispered. "They're actually talking about how media handles serious issues on media." Back on stage, Colbert gestured to the audience. "We have people who paid good money to see a comedy show tonight. I feel like I should be telling jokes." Denzel turned to face the audience directly. "Are you all okay with this? With us having a real conversation instead of the usual celebrity promotional interview?" His question wasn't rhetorical. He truly wanted to know. The response was immediate. People began to applaud, slowly at first, then building to a sustained ovation. One woman near the front stood up, followed by others, until the entire audience was on their feet. "I think that's your answer," Colbert said with a smile. Denzel seemed moved by the response. "Look at that. People are hungry for something real." As the applause finally quieted, both men took seats on the edge of the stage steps rather than returning to the desk. This simple change in positioning transformed the dynamic completely. "You know," Denzel said, "I've done hundreds of these interviews over decades, always following the same script. Promote the movie, tell a funny story, laugh at the host's jokes, go home. And I've conducted thousands of them," Colbert added, always with one eye on the clock, rushing to hit the planned talking points. The floor director, initially frantic about the departure from the script, had now settled into a calm acceptance, signaling the camera operators to capture this unprecedented exchange with minimal intrusion. "Maybe this is a moment to reconsider how we do this," Denzel suggested. "Not just you and me tonight, but all of us, how we talk to each other about important things." As they continued their conversation, something remarkable was happening. What had begun as a potential disaster, a guest threatening to walk off, had transformed into something that felt necessary and overdue, an honest examination of how media shapes our discourse happening on media itself. And viewers at home, who had tuned in expecting the usual light-hearted banter, found themselves unable to look away. Behind the scenes of The Late Show, chaos had given way to an unexpected calm. The production staff, initially panicked by the departure from script, now moved with purpose, adapting to the unfolding situation with a newfound focus. In a small room just offstage, network executives huddled around a monitor, watching the live feed with a mixture of concern and fascination. The studio's phone lines were lighting up, and social media mentions of the show had skyrocketed in the past 15 minutes. "Should we cut it short?" asked one executive, his tie loosened and brow furrowed. The head of programming shook her head firmly. "Absolutely not. This is the most authentic moment I've seen on television in years." Meanwhile, Denzel and Colbert had moved to a quiet corner backstage during the commercial break. Away from cameras and microphones, they spoke in hushed tones. "Aren't you sure you want to continue?" Colbert asked, genuine concern in his voice. "This isn't what you signed up for when you agreed to come on the show." Denzel took a sip of water, considering the question carefully. "You know, I came here thinking I'd just talk about my movie, but maybe there's a reason this happened tonight." A production assistant approached tentatively. 30 seconds until we're back." Colbert nodded his thanks and turned back to his guest. "So what's the way forward? How do we make this meaningful?" "Let's talk about why these conversations matter," Denzel suggested. "Beyond ratings and sound bites. Let's talk about the real impact of how we communicate in public spaces." As they walked back toward the stage, Colbert asked one final question. "What do you hope comes from this?" Denzel paused, his hand on the curtain. "Understanding. Not agreement necessarily, but understanding." The on-air light flashed back to life, and both men returned to the set, now rearranged with comfortable chairs facing each other rather than the traditional talk show desk. The audience welcomed them with warm applause, sensing they were witnessing something rare. "Welcome back," Colbert said to the camera. "If you are just joining us, we're having a conversation with Denzel Washington that's taken an unexpected but important turn. We've decided to set aside our usual format to explore something that matters deeply to both of us: how we talk about important issues in public." Denzel settled into his chair, a newfound ease in his posture. "I want to apologize if I seemed confrontational earlier. That wasn't my intention." "No apology needed," Colbert assured him. "Sometimes the most valuable conversations begin with a moment of tension." In the audience, a young woman watched with intense focus, a phone forgotten in her lap. She had come expecting entertainment, but found herself witnessing something that felt more valuable: a genuine exchange between two people trying to understand each other. "Here's what concerns me," Denzel continued. "We live in a world where complex issues get reduced to headlines and tweets, where thoughtful conversation gets drowned out by shouting." Colbert nodded. "And I'm part of that problem sometimes. This format, late-night TV, it's built for quick laughs and viral clips, not depth." "Exactly," Denzel agreed. "But it doesn't have to be that way. Look at what's happening right now. We're having a real conversation and people are engaged." He gestured to the attentive audience. A camera panned across the crowd, capturing expressions of genuine interest rather than the eager anticipation of laughter that typically characterized talk show audiences. "I think people are hungry for this," Colbert observed. "For authenticity. For conversations that don't just reinforce what they already believe." "That's it," Denzel said, leaning forward with growing passion. "We've been underestimating viewers, readers, audiences, assuming they can't handle complexity or nuance." In the control room, a director who had initially been frantic about the departure from script now directed her team with quiet confidence, understanding that they were capturing something special. "So what do we do about it?" Colbert asked. "How do we create spaces for these kinds of conversations?" Denzel considered the question thoughtfully. "It starts with moments like this, with being willing to step outside the usual formulas, with remembering that behind every issue are real people with real lives." As their conversation deepened, viewers at home found themselves drawn in, many putting down their phones to give the exchange their full attention, a rare occurrence in an age of constant distraction. When the show returned from its next commercial break, something remarkable had happened to the set. The production team had worked quickly to transform the space, removing the traditional talk show desk entirely. Now, a simple circle of chairs stood center stage, with Denzel and Colbert joined by three people selected from the audience. The studio lights had been dimmed slightly, creating an atmosphere more suited for conversation than performance. "Welcome back," Colbert said, his voice carrying a warmth rarely heard in his usual hosting persona. "As you can see, we're trying something completely new tonight. We've invited a few audience members to join our conversation about how we discuss important issues in public spaces." The audience members, a college professor, a firefighter, and a small business owner, settled nervously into their chairs, clearly surprised to find themselves suddenly part of the show. "I suggested this during the break," Denzel explained, turning to include the newcomers in his gaze, "because it's not just about how media personalities talk to each other. It's about bringing more voices into these conversations." The professor adjusted her glasses and spoke up. "I came tonight expecting to be entertained. I never imagined I'd be part of the show." "None of us did," Colbert laughed, gesturing to include himself and Denzel. "That's what makes this special. We're figuring it out as we go." The cameras, usually focused tightly on celebrity faces to catch every expression, now pulled back to capture the entire circle, emphasizing the group dynamic rather than any individual. "I have a question," said the firefighter, his work-worn hands clasped in front of him. "Why is it so hard for people in the public eye to have honest conversations? Why does everything feel so scripted?" Denzel nodded appreciatively at the directness of the question. "Fear," he answered simply. "Fear of saying the wrong thing. Fear of being misunderstood. When millions of people are watching, one misspoken word can follow you forever." "That's exactly it," Colbert agreed. In my regular show format, I have writers crafting every word, producers timing every segment. It's safer that way. But less real, added the business owner quietly. Much less real, Denzel confirmed, leaning forward in his chair. And I think that's why people are tuning out of traditional media. They can sense the difference between authentic conversation and performance. In the control room, network executives watched in amazement as social media metrics continued to climb. What had begun as a potential PR disaster was transforming into something unprecedented, a genuine conversation about communication itself, happening on one of the biggest platforms in entertainment. "We're getting calls from other networks," whispered an assistant producer, covering her microphone. "Everyone wants to know what's happening." Back on stage, the conversation had deepened beyond the initial tension that sparked it. The firefighter shared his frustration with how issues affecting his community were often reduced to political talking points. The professor spoke about the challenge of teaching students to engage with complex ideas in an age of sound bites. The business owner described how social divisions affected her customers and employees. Throughout it all, Denzel and Colbert listened with genuine interest, occasionally adding insights but never dominating the exchange. The hierarchy that typically placed the celebrity guest and famous host above ordinary people had dissolved completely. "This is what's missing," Denzel observed during a natural pause in the conversation. "This right here. People from different walks of life, with different perspectives, actually listening to each other." Colbert nodded thoughtfully, and it happened by accident, because you were willing to disrupt the usual script. A camera operator, caught up in the moment, forgot his training and let out an audible yes. The entire studio laughed, breaking any remaining tension. "I think what we're discovering," Denzel said, including everyone in his gaze, "is that the format matters. How we structure these conversations determines what's possible within them." As the final commercial break approached, there was a reluctance in the air. No one wanted to end this unexpected moment. The floor director, sensing this, held up 10 fingers indicating they had 10 more minutes before they needed to wrap up. Colbert turned to Denzel with genuine appreciation in his expression. "When you first stood up and took off your microphone, I thought this would be the worst night of my career. Now I'm thinking it might be the most important." Denzel smiled. "Sometimes the most valuable things happen when we're willing to be uncomfortable, when we step outside what's familiar." As viewers across the country watched, many found themselves experiencing something rare in modern media, a sense of authentic human connection that transcended entertainment. The morning after Denzel Washington's appearance on The Late Show, something unusual happened across America. People weren't just talking about the interview, they were having conversations about conversations. The unprecedented exchange had triggered a wave of reflection about how we communicate in public spaces. Dawn broke over New York City as news producers at every major network huddled in their morning meetings. Clips from the previous night's show had already gone viral, not for the usual reasons of celebrity gossip or political outrage, but for something far rarer, authentic human connection on mainstream television. "I've never seen anything like it," said a veteran morning show host, watching the footage again in the production booth. "They completely threw out the playbook." Outside the Ed Sullivan Theater, a small crowd had gathered despite the early hour. Some held signs with messages like, "More of this, please," and "Real conversations matter." Network executives, initially panicked by the unscripted nature of the previous night's show, were now fielding calls from advertisers who wanted to be associated with what people were calling the Denzel moment. In coffee shops and break rooms across the country, people who normally discussed celebrity interviews with passing interest were engaged in deeper conversations. A barista in Seattle overheard 2 regular customers discussing the show. "Did you see how they changed the whole set mid-show? They literally broke down the barriers between them." Social media platforms, usually filled with brief, angry exchanges, featured unusually thoughtful threads analyzing what had happened. Media professors were giving interviews, calling it a potential turning point in broadcast television. "What they did wasn't just good TV," explained a communications expert on a popular podcast. "It was a demonstration of what's possible when we prioritize understanding over entertainment." By mid-morning, the hashtag The Real Conversation was trending nationwide. People were sharing their own experiences of meaningful dialogues and lamenting how rare such exchanges had become in public life. In a quiet corner office overlooking Central Park, Denzel himself was reading through some of the reactions on his assistant's tablet. Unlike most mornings after a major TV appearance, he wasn't checking ratings or publicity metrics. Instead, he was reading messages from viewers who felt moved by what they'd witnessed. This high school teacher says she's using clips from our conversation in her class today, he noted with quiet satisfaction. Says it's a perfect example of civil discourse. Meanwhile, in his own office, Colbert was on a conference call with his production team, planning how to build on what had happened. "I'm not saying we abandon entertainment," he explained to his writers. "I'm saying we expand our definition of what's possible within this format." At network headquarters, executives who had feared career-ending disaster were now discussing a special series based on the previous night's formula. "Viewers are hungry for this," insisted the head of programming. "They want to see people really talking to each other, not just performing for each other." By afternoon, the impact had spread beyond entertainment. Politicians were being asked by reporters if they'd seen the exchange and what they thought about its implications for public discourse. Several admitted they had instructed their staffers to study the clips for insights about authentic communication. A popular late-night comedian, scheduled to take his own show that evening, was meeting with writers to rethink their approach. "We can't just go back to business as usual," he told them. "Something shifted last night." In living rooms across America, families were having their own conversations about the show. A grandfather in Ohio told his grandchildren about a time when television regularly featured extended, thoughtful discussions. "Last night reminded me of that," he said. "It wasn't about sound bites or going viral. It was about really listening to each other." As evening approached, media analysts were already declaring the exchange a cultural milestone. "We've become so accustomed to carefully scripted interactions that we've forgotten what real conversation looks like," wrote one respected columnist. "Last night reminded us. What had started as a potential disaster, a guest threatening to walk off a major network show, had transformed into something entirely unexpected, a moment of genuine human connection that transcended entertainment." And in living rooms across America, viewers were turning on their televisions with a new question in mind. Would tonight's shows return to business as usual, or had something fundamentally changed in how we talk to each other in public? The answer remained to be seen. But for one night at least, the wall between performance and authenticity had come down, and millions of people had glimpsed what might be possible on the other side.